What would you do if the person you loved most in the world was being blamed for something that was actually your fault? What if keeping a secret meant watching them suffer, but revealing it would destroy everything you'd built together? This is the story of Kelechi and Chioma Nwankwo, a couple whose love was tested by infertility, family pressure, and a secret so profound that it shaped 20 years of their lives in ways neither of them fully understood. Welcome to Narrated by Abi, where we explore the most complex and emotionally charged true stories that reveal the depths of human nature. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because today's story will challenge everything you think you know about marriage, sacrifice, and the lengths people will go to protect the ones they love. And if this story moves you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Chioma Nwankwo had always dreamed of being a mother. Growing up as the eldest of 6 children in a bustling household in Enugu, she had spent her childhood helping to care for her younger siblings, changing diapers, preparing bottles, and soothing crying babies. Motherhood felt like her natural calling, and when she married Kelechi in a beautiful traditional ceremony in 2003, she assumed that children would follow naturally and quickly. Kelechi Nwankwo was everything Chioma had hoped for in a husband. He was kind, hard-working, and deeply devoted to her. As a software engineer working for one of Lagos's emerging tech companies, he provided well for their small family and treated Chioma with the respect and love she had always dreamed of receiving from a partner. Their early months of marriage were filled with joy, laughter, and the excited anticipation of the children they would soon welcome. But as months turned into years, Chioma's arms remained empty. The first year, they weren't worried. They were young, healthy, and enjoying their time as newlyweds. These things take time, Chioma's mother assured her during one of their weekly phone calls. Just relax and let nature take its course. The second year brought the first whispers of concern. Chioma's mother-in-law, Mama Kelechi, began making pointed comments about the lack of grandchildren. In my day, she would say during family gatherings, women knew how to fulfill their duties as wives. Children came quickly because that's what God intended. By the third year, the whispers had become open criticism. Kelechi's extended family, particularly his aunts and uncles, began to suggest that perhaps Chioma was barren, a word that cut through her heart like a knife every time she heard it. They spoke about her as if she weren't in the room, discussing her fertility as if it were a business transaction that wasn't yielding the expected returns. Maybe she's not eating the right foods, Aunt Adays would suggest. Or perhaps she's too educated. These modern women, they think too much, and their wombs forget their purpose. I've heard of women who were cursed by jealous relatives, Uncle Emeka would add ominously. Perhaps she should see a traditional healer to break whatever spell has been cast on her. Chioma endured these conversations with as much grace as she could muster, but each comment was like a small death. She began to dread family gatherings, knowing that her childlessness would be the primary topic of discussion. She watched her sisters-in-law arrive with their growing broods of children, receiving praise and attention while she sat in the corner, invisible and inadequate. Kelechi tried to shield her from the worst of it, but he was fighting a losing battle against the collective pressure of his extended family. In Igbo culture, a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to produce children, particularly sons, and Chioma's failure to conceive was seen as a reflection not just on her, but on Kelechi's choice in a wife. You should consider taking a second wife, Kelechi's father suggested during a private conversation in the 4th year of their marriage. Chioma is a good woman, but if she cannot give you children, you need to think about your legacy. What will happen to our family name if you have no sons to carry it forward? Kelechi firmly rejected this suggestion, but the pressure was mounting from all sides. His mother began bringing eligible young women to family events, introducing them as friends of the family, while making pointed comments about their fertility and domestic skills. His siblings started having conversations about inheritance and family property that pointedly excluded any mention of Chioma's potential children. The most painful moments came during church services, when the pastor would call for prayers for barren women, and Chioma would feel eye in the congregation turn toward her. She would bow her head and pray with desperate intensity, begging God to bless her with a child, to end the shame and disappointment that had become her constant companions. What Chioma didn't know was that her husband was carrying a secret that made her suffering even more tragic. Kelechi had discovered his infertility during a routine medical examination in his final year of university, 3 years before he met Chioma. The diagnosis had come as a shock, a severe case of azoospermia, a condition where no sperm are produced, likely caused by a childhood illness that had gone undiagnosed and untreated. The doctor had been gentle but direct in explaining the implications. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but you will never be able to father children naturally. The condition is irreversible, and there are no treatments that can restore your fertility." At 22 years old, Kelechi had felt his world collapse. He had always assumed he would have a large family, following in the tradition of his father and grandfather. The idea that he would never have biological children was devastating. But even more devastating was the thought of how this news would be received by his family and community. In a culture where masculinity was often defined by a man's ability to produce offspring, particularly sons, infertility was seen as a fundamental failure of manhood. Kelechi knew that revealing his condition would not only destroy his own reputation, but would also bring shame upon his entire family. His father, who took great pride in the family's lineage and traditions, would be devastated to learn that the family name would end with Kelechi. So Kelechi made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would keep his infertility a secret. When he met Chioma 2 years later, he was immediately drawn to her warmth, intelligence, and kindness. She was everything he wanted in a partner, and he fell deeply in love with her. But as their relationship grew serious and talk turned to marriage and children, Kelechi found himself trapped by his secret. He told himself that he would find a way to tell her before they married, but as the wedding date approached, he couldn't bring himself to risk losing the woman he loved. He convinced himself that perhaps the doctors had been wrong, that maybe a miracle would occur, that somehow they would find a way to have children together. But deep down, he knew the truth. And as the months and years of their marriage passed without conception, he watched his beloved wife suffer under the weight of blame that rightfully belonged to him. The guilt was overwhelming. Every time his family criticized Chioma, every time she cried after another negative pregnancy test, every time she endured the humiliation of being called barren, Kelechi felt the weight of his deception crushing down on him. He wanted to tell the truth, to take the blame upon himself, and free Chioma from the shame she was enduring. But he was paralyzed by fear. Fear of losing his wife's love when she discovered his deception. Fear of his family's reaction when they learned the truth about his condition. Fear of the social ostracism that would follow such a revelation. Fear of admitting that he had built their entire marriage on a foundation of lies. So he remained silent, watching the woman he loved suffer for his failures, carrying the secret that was slowly destroying both of their lives. By the 5th year of their marriage, Chioma was at her breaking point. The constant pressure from Kelechi's family had worn her down, and she was beginning to believe that perhaps she truly was defective, that something fundamental was wrong with her, that prevented her from fulfilling what she saw as her most basic purpose as a woman. She had undergone countless medical tests, all of which showed that she was perfectly healthy and capable of conceiving. The doctors assured her that there was no medical reason why she couldn't get pregnant, which only added to her confusion and desperation. If she was healthy, why wasn't she conceiving? What was wrong with her that even medical science couldn't identify? The breaking point came during a particularly brutal family gathering, where Kelechi's aunts spent the entire afternoon discussing Chioma's failure as a wife. They spoke about her as if she weren't sitting right there, debating whether she was cursed, whether she was being punished for some unknown sin, whether Kelechi should divorce her and find a proper wife who could give him children. That night, Chioma cried herself to sleep while Kelechi held her, both of them trapped in their own private hells, she by her perceived inadequacy, he by his knowledge of the truth he couldn't bring himself to reveal. The next day, Chioma met with her closest friend, Ngozi, for their weekly coffee date. Ngozi had been Chioma's roommate in university and was one of the few people who truly understood the depth of her pain. Unlike Kelechi's family, Ngozi had never blamed Chioma for her childlessness, instead offering support and encouragement through the difficult years. "I can't take it anymore," Chioma confessed, tears streaming down her face. "His family hates me, and I'm starting to think they're right. Maybe there is something wrong with me that the doctors can't find. Maybe I'm just not meant to be a mother." Ngozi listened with the patience of a true friend. But as Chioma continued to pour out her heart, something occurred to her that she had never considered before. "Chioma," she said carefully, "have you ever considered that maybe the problem isn't with you?" "What do you mean? I've been tested for everything. The doctors say I'm fine." "I mean, have you considered that maybe Kelechi is the one with the fertility problem?" Chioma stared at her friend in shock. In all the years of trying to conceive, in all the medical appointments and family discussions and painful conversations, the possibility that Kelechi might be infertile had never been seriously considered. In their culture, infertility was almost always assumed to be the woman's fault, and men were rarely tested or questioned about their reproductive health. But that's not possible," Chioma stammered. "He's never been tested, but he's so healthy, so strong. And his family would never blame me if they thought he was the problem." "Exactly," Ngozi said gently. "His family would never blame you if they knew he was the problem. But what if he doesn't know? What if he's never been tested? What if he's just assuming, like everyone else, that the problem must be with you?" The conversation that followed was one that would change Chioma's life forever, though not in the way either woman expected. Ngozi, who worked in the medical field and had seen many cases of male infertility, explained how common the condition actually was, and how rarely it was diagnosed in their culture due to social stigma and assumptions about masculinity. She suggested that Chioma should encourage Kelechi to get tested. But she also made another suggestion that was far more controversial. "If you really want to know if you can get pregnant," Ngozi said hesitantly, "there's one way to find out for certain." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you were to try with someone else, just once, just to see if you can conceive, then you would know for certain whether the problem is with you or with Kelechi." Chioma was horrified by the suggestion. "Ngozi, I could never cheat on my husband. I love him, I would never betray him like that." "I'm not talking about cheating," Ngozi said quickly. "I'm talking about a medical solution to a medical problem. If you can conceive with someone else, then you know the problem is with Kelechi, and you can address it from there. If you can't conceive with someone else, then you know the problem is with you, and you can stop torturing yourself about it." "But that would still be adultery. That would still be a betrayal." "Would it?" Ngozi asked. "Or would it be a desperate woman trying to save her marriage and her sanity? Chioma, you're dying inside. Your marriage is being destroyed by this pressure. Your husband's family is treating you like a pariah. If there's a chance that you could have children and save your marriage, isn't it worth considering?" Chioma left that conversation feeling more confused and conflicted than ever. The suggestion went against everything she believed about marriage, fidelity, and moral behavior, but it also offered something she had almost given up hope of finding: answers. Over the following weeks, the idea consumed her thoughts. She found herself imagining what it would be like to finally hold a baby in her arms, to see the joy on Kelechi's face when she told him she was pregnant, to silence the critics in his family once and for all. She thought about the years of pain and humiliation she had endured, and wondered if there might be a way to end it all. The decision, when it finally came, was born not of lust or romantic desire, but of desperation and love. Chioma loved her husband so much that she was willing to risk everything to give him the children he wanted and to prove that she was not the failure his family believed her to be. Ngozi had a colleague named Emeka, who worked in the same hospital where she was employed as a nurse. He was a laboratory technician, divorced, with no children of his own. He was discreet, trustworthy, and according to Ngozi, would be willing to help with their unusual situation without expecting anything beyond the arrangement itself. The conversations leading up to the arrangement were clinical and businesslike, which helped Chioma maintain some emotional distance from what she was about to do. Emeka understood that this was not about romance or relationship, but about helping a desperate woman determine whether she could conceive. He agreed to help, with the understanding that if pregnancy resulted, he would have no claim on the child and no ongoing involvement in their lives. This is purely medical, Chioma told herself repeatedly. This is about saving my marriage and finding answers. This is not betrayal, this is survival. The encounter itself was brief, awkward, and emotionally devastating for Chioma. She felt like she was betraying everything she believed in, even as she told herself that she was doing it for love. She cried the entire way home, praying for forgiveness, and hoping that somehow this desperate act would lead to the answers and the children she so desperately wanted. 6 weeks later, Chioma missed her period for the first time in 5 years of marriage. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, and Chioma stared at it in shock, joy, and terror. She was pregnant. After 5 years of trying, 5 years of blame and shame and heartbreak, she was finally carrying a child. But the child wasn't her husband's. When Chioma told Kelechi about the pregnancy, his reaction was everything she had dreamed of, and more. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around their small living room, tears of joy streaming down his face. For the first time in years, she saw him truly happy, truly hopeful about their future. "I knew it would happen," he said, holding her close. "I knew God would bless us eventually. You're going to be the most wonderful mother, Chioma. Our child is so lucky to have you." The guilt nearly overwhelmed her. Here was her husband, the man she loved more than life itself, celebrating what he believed was their miracle. And she knew it was built on the most fundamental deception possible. But seeing his joy, seeing the weight of disappointment and pressure lift from his shoulders, she convinced herself that she had made the right choice. The reaction from Kelechi's family was immediate and dramatic. Suddenly, Chioma was no longer the barren woman who had failed in her duties as a wife. She was the miracle worker who had finally fulfilled her purpose. Mama Kelechi, who had been cold and critical for years, suddenly became warm and protective, fussing over Chioma's diet and rest schedule. "I always knew she would conceive eventually," Mama Kelechi announced to anyone who would listen, conveniently forgetting the years of criticism and blame. "Some women just take longer to ripen, like fruit on a tree, but when they do, they produce the sweetest children." The aunts and uncles who had whispered about curses and traditional healers now spoke about Chioma with respect and admiration. She was invited to family gatherings with enthusiasm rather than obligation. Her opinions were sought and valued. For the first time since her marriage, she felt like she truly belonged in the Nwankwo family. But the guilt was a constant companion. Every time Kelechi placed his hand on her growing belly and spoke to their child, every time he made plans for their future as a family, every time he expressed his gratitude for the miracle of her pregnancy, Chioma felt the weight of her deception growing heavier. She tried to tell herself that the child would be theirs in every way that mattered. Kelechi would be the father who raised the child, who loved and provided for them, who taught them right from wrong. Biology was just genetics. Real parenthood was about love and commitment and daily care. But late at night, when Kelechi was sleeping peacefully beside her, his hand resting protectively on her belly, Chioma would lie awake wondering what she had done and whether the price of her desperate solution would eventually destroy everything she had tried to save. What she didn't know was that her husband was lying awake beside her, wrestling with his own guilt and his own impossible secret. When Chioma announced her pregnancy, Kelechi's joy was genuine, but it was mixed with a confusion that he couldn't share with anyone. He knew, with medical certainty, that he could not father children. The diagnosis from years earlier had been definitive, and nothing had changed about his condition, which meant that the child Chioma was carrying was not biologically his. His first instinct was to confront her, to demand an explanation for how she had become pregnant when he knew it was impossible for him to be the father. But as he watched her glowing with happiness for the first time in years, as he saw his family finally accepting and celebrating her, as he witnessed the transformation from despair to joy that the pregnancy had brought to their lives, he found himself unable to speak. Instead, he began to understand what must have happened. Chioma was not a woman who would have an affair for pleasure or romance. She was deeply moral, deeply committed to their marriage, and deeply in love with him. If she had been with another man, it could only have been for one reason: desperation to conceive the child that would save their marriage and end her suffering. The realization was both heartbreaking and humbling. His wife had been driven to such desperate measures because of the secret he had been too cowardly to reveal. She had sacrificed her own moral principles to solve a problem that was actually his fault, not hers. Kelechi found himself faced with an impossible choice. He could reveal the truth about his infertility, which would expose Chioma's affair and potentially destroy their marriage and their standing in the community. Or he could remain silent, accept the child as his own, and allow everyone to believe that their fertility problems had simply resolved themselves naturally. The choice, when he made it, was motivated by love and guilt in equal measure. He loved Chioma too much to expose her desperate act and subject her to the shame and condemnation that would follow. He felt too guilty about his own deception to punish her for the consequences of his cowardice, and he wanted, more than anything, to be a father to this child who would be his in every way except genetics. So Kelechi made the same choice his wife had made. He chose love over truth, protection over honesty, and the preservation of their family over the revelation of painful realities. He would raise this child as his own, love them as his own, and never reveal that he knew the truth about their conception. It was his way of atoning for the years of suffering his secret had caused, and his gift to the woman who had sacrificed so much to give him the family he had always wanted. Chioma's first pregnancy was healthy and uneventful, and she gave birth to a beautiful daughter they named Adiz, meaning daughter of the king. Kelechi was present for the birth, cutting the umbilical cord and holding his daughter with tears of joy streaming down his face. To everyone watching, he was simply a proud father welcoming his first child. Only he and Chioma knew the complex truth behind that moment. The arrival of Adiz transformed their lives in ways both wonderful and complicated. Kelechi proved to be a devoted father, spending hours holding his daughter, singing to her, and marveling at every milestone. His love for the child was genuine and complete, and watching him with Adiz, Chioma sometimes almost forgot the circumstances of her conception. But the guilt remained, and it was compounded by a new fear. What if this was their only child? What if the pregnancy had been a fluke, and they would return to the years of trying and failing to conceive? 18 months after Adiz's birth, when Chioma had not conceived again naturally, she found herself facing the same desperate choice that had led to her daughter's conception. She loved being a mother, loved seeing Kelechi as a father, and couldn't bear the thought of returning to the years of disappointment and family pressure. So she made the arrangement with Emeka again. This time, the guilt was even more overwhelming, because she was no longer acting out of desperation to prove her fertility, but out of a desire to expand the family she had created through deception. But she was also more convinced that she was doing the right thing, because she could see how happy Kelechi was as a father, and how much their daughter meant to him. The second pregnancy resulted in a son, Chinedu, meaning God leads. 2 years later, another arrangement led to another daughter, Chiamaka, meaning God is beautiful. Then came another son, Obina, meaning father's heart, and finally another daughter, Ifeoma, meaning good thing. 5 children in 8 years, each one conceived through the same desperate arrangement, each one welcomed with joy by Kelechi and his family, each one adding another layer to the complex web of secrets that defined their marriage. To the outside world, the Nwankwos had become the perfect family. Kelechi was seen as a successful man who had been blessed with a fertile wife and 5 beautiful children. Chioma was celebrated as a devoted mother who had overcome her early fertility struggles to build a large, happy family. The children were healthy, intelligent, and well-behaved, reflecting well on their parents' love and guidance. But beneath the surface, both parents carried the weight of their secrets. Kelechi knew that none of the children were biologically his, but he loved them as if they were. Chioma knew that she had built their family on a foundation of deception, but she couldn't imagine any other way she could have given her husband the children he wanted. They never spoke about the truth, but they both lived with it every day. It was present in every family photo, every school event, every moment of pride in their children's accomplishments. It was the shadow that followed their happiness, the price they had paid for the family they had created. For 20 years, they maintained this delicate balance, raising their children with love and dedication while carrying their individual burdens of guilt and knowledge. The children grew up happy and secure, never suspecting that their family's origin story was far more complicated than they knew. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of demanding to be revealed. Kelechi Nwankwo graduated from the University of Lagos with a degree in medicine, following in the footsteps of the doctors who had once told her mother that there was no medical reason she couldn't conceive. It was a proud moment for the entire family, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. The graduation ceremony was held on a beautiful Saturday morning in June, with families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. Kelechi and Chioma sat in the audience with their other 4 children, beaming with pride as Adaezi's name was called, and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, a man approached the Nwankwo family group. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed. Chioma recognized him immediately, though she hadn't seen him in over 15 years. It was Emeka, the biological father of all 5 of her children. "Congratulations," he said, his eyes fixed on Adaeze. "You must be very proud of your daughter's achievement." Kelechi extended his hand politely, assuming this was simply another well-wisher. "Thank you. Yes, we're very proud of Adaeze. She's worked very hard for this moment." "I'm sure she has," Emeka replied, his gaze never leaving Adaeze's face. "She's grown into a beautiful young woman. She has her mother's eyes, but I think she has my chin." The comment hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Chioma felt the blood drain from her face, while Kelechi's expression shifted from polite confusion to growing alarm. "I'm sorry," Kelechi said carefully. "Do we know you?" "Not exactly," Emeka replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But I know your family very well. In fact, I've been watching your children grow up from a distance for years. I've been particularly interested in Adaeze's progress, since she's my daughter." The words hit like a physical blow. Adaeze looked confused. The other children stared in shock, and Chioma felt like the world was collapsing around her. "I think there's been some mistake," Kelechi said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting inside him. "No mistake," Emeka said confidently. "I have DNA evidence if you'd like to see it. I've been keeping track of all my children, Adaeze, Chinedu, Chiamaka, Obina, and little Ifeoma. 5 beautiful children who deserve to know who their real father is." What followed was a nightmare that Chioma had feared for 20 years, but had never fully prepared for. Emeka had not approached them out of paternal love or a desire to connect with his biological children. He had come with a plan that was both calculated and cruel. Over the years, Emeka's life had not gone as well as he had hoped. His career had stagnated, his finances were precarious, and he had watched from afar as Kelechi's success had grown. He had seen the beautiful home the Nwankwos had built, the private schools their children attended, the comfortable lifestyle they enjoyed, and he had begun to feel that he deserved a share of it. After all, he reasoned, those children were his biological offspring. Without his contribution, the Nwankwo family wouldn't exist. Didn't that entitle him to some recognition, some compensation for his role in their creation? The blackmail demand was straightforward. Kelechi would pay Emeka a substantial monthly sum in exchange for his silence about the children's true parentage. If Kelechi refused, Emeka would reveal the truth to the children, to Kelechi's family, to their church community, and to anyone else who would listen. "Think about what this revelation would do to your family," Emeka said during their first private meeting. "Think about how your children would feel knowing that their entire lives have been built on a lie. Think about how your parents would react when they learn that none of their grandchildren carry their blood. Think about your reputation in the community when people discover that your wife was unfaithful and you've been raising another man's children. The threat was devastating because it was real. In their conservative community, the revelation would indeed destroy their family's reputation and standing. The children would be traumatized by learning the truth about their parentage. Kelechi's family would be humiliated and angry. Their marriage might not survive the public exposure of such a fundamental deception. But Emeka had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that Kelechi was an innocent victim who had been deceived by his wife. The confrontation that would change everything happened 3 days after Emeka's initial blackmail demand. Kelechi had asked for time to consider the situation, and Emeka had agreed, confident that he held all the cards and that Kelechi would ultimately pay rather than risk the destruction of his family. What Emeka didn't expect was for Kelechi to call a family meeting that included not just Chioma and the children, but also his parents and siblings. He had asked everyone to gather at their home on Sunday evening, saying he had something important to discuss with the entire family. As the family assembled in their living room, the tension was palpable. Chioma sat beside Kelechi, her hands trembling as she wondered what he was planning to reveal. The children sensed that something serious was happening, but they had no idea how dramatically their understanding of their family was about to change. Kelechi stood before his assembled family, looking at each face with love and determination. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. 23 years ago, he began, I received news that changed my life forever. I was told by doctors that I would never be able to father children naturally. I was diagnosed with a condition that made me completely infertile. The room erupted in shocked gasps and confused questions, but Kelechi held up his hand for silence. I kept this diagnosis secret because I was ashamed, because I was afraid of disappointing my family, and because I was terrified of losing the woman I loved. When Chioma and I married, I still hadn't told her the truth about my condition. He looked at his wife, his eyes filled with love and regret. For 5 years, I watched my wife suffer under the blame for our inability to have children, knowing that the fault was mine, not hers. I watched my family criticize and condemn her for something that was actually my failure, and I was too much of a coward to tell the truth. Chioma was crying now, understanding for the first time that her husband had known all along about his infertility, that he had carried his own burden of guilt and secrecy throughout their marriage. When Chioma became pregnant with Adaez, Kelechi continued, I knew immediately that the child could not be biologically mine. I knew that my wife, in her desperation to give me children and to end her own suffering, had made an arrangement that allowed her to conceive. The children stared at their parents in shock, beginning to understand the implications of what their father was revealing. I could have confronted her then, Kelechi said. I could have demanded explanations and accusations, but instead I chose to accept the gift she was giving me. The chance to be a father, to raise children, to have the family I had always wanted. I chose love over pride, family over biology, and forgiveness over condemnation. He looked at each of his children in turn. Adaeze, Chinedu, Chiamaka, Obinna, Ifeoma. You are my children in every way that matters. I have loved you from the moment you were born. I have been proud of every achievement. I have worried about every challenge you've faced. The fact that we don't share DNA doesn't change the fact that you are my heart, my legacy, my greatest joy. The room was silent, except for the sound of crying. Mama Kelechi sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just learned. The children looked at their parents with a mixture of shock, confusion, and love. I'm telling you this now, Kelechi continued, because someone is trying to use this information to hurt our family. Someone believes that this secret gives them power over us, that they can threaten to destroy what we've built together, unless we pay them to keep quiet. He stood straighter, his voice growing stronger. But I refuse to be blackmailed by someone who contributed nothing to this family except genetic material. I refuse to let anyone hold our love and our bond hostage to their greed. The truth is out now, and while it may be painful, it cannot be used as a weapon against us anymore. The immediate aftermath of Kelechi's revelation was chaotic and emotional. Some family members reacted with anger, others with confusion, and still others with a grudging respect for the courage it had taken to tell the truth. Mama Kelechi was perhaps the most shocked of all. For 20 years, she had celebrated her grandchildren, boasted about their achievements, and built her identity as a grandmother around these 5 children. Learning that they were not biologically related to her family was devastating. But as she looked at Adaeze, who had just graduated from medical school, at Chinedu, who was excelling in engineering, at Chiamaka, who was studying law, at Obina, who was a gifted athlete, and at Ifeoma, who showed promise as an artist, she realized something important. These children were still the same people she had loved and been proud of for years. Their achievements were still real, their characters were still admirable, and their place in her heart was still secure. "They are still my grandchildren," she said finally, her voice shaking with emotion. "Blood or no blood, they are still my family." The children's reactions were more complex. Adaeze, as the eldest, felt the weight of the revelation most heavily. She was angry at first, angry at her mother for the deception, angry at her father for keeping the secret, angry at the situation that had created such a complicated family dynamic. But as she processed the information, she began to understand the impossible choices her parents had faced. Her mother had been driven to desperate measures by family pressure and her own desire to have children. Her father had chosen love and acceptance over pride and biological connection. "You're still my papa," she told Kelechi through her tears. "You're the one who taught me to ride a bicycle, who helped me with my homework, who cheered at my graduation. That doesn't change because of genetics." The other children, each in their own way, came to similar conclusions. They were hurt by the deception, confused by the complexity of the situation, but ultimately secure in the love they had always known from both parents. The extended family's reaction was more mixed. Some relatives were scandalized by the revelation and struggled to accept the children as legitimate family members. Others were more understanding, recognizing that the bonds of love and care were more important than biological connections. But the most important outcome was that Emeka's power to blackmail them had been completely eliminated. By revealing the truth themselves, the Nwankwo family had taken control of their own narrative and removed the weapon that Emeka had tried to use against them. When Emeka learned that Kelechi had revealed the truth to his family, he was furious. His carefully planned blackmail scheme had been destroyed, and he found himself with no leverage and no way to extract money from the situation. But rather than accepting defeat, Emeka escalated his demands. If he couldn't blackmail the family into paying him, he would demand recognition as the biological father of the children and seek legal rights to visitation and involvement in their lives. This was where Emeka made his final and most serious miscalculation. He had assumed that because he was the biological father, he would have legal rights to the children. But the law, particularly in cases involving children who had been raised by other fathers for their entire lives, was more complex than he understood. Kelechi and Chioma consulted with a family law attorney who explained their options. Because Kelechi was listed as the father on all the children's birth certificates, because he had raised them as his own for their entire lives, and because the children were all now adults or nearly adults, Emeka had no legal standing to demand visitation or involvement. More importantly, Emeka's attempt to blackmail the family was itself illegal, and his continued harassment of them after they had made it clear they wanted no contact with him constituted stalking and intimidation. The attorney helped them file for a restraining order against Emeka, documenting his blackmail attempts and his unwanted contact with the family. The court granted the order, legally prohibiting Emeka from contacting any member of the Nwankwo family or coming within a specified distance of their home, workplace, or children's schools. When Emeka violated the restraining order by showing up at Chinedu's university, he was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. The legal consequences of his actions finally made him understand that his attempts to insert himself into the family's life would only result in punishment for himself. The restraining order and the legal proceedings sent a clear message. The Nwankwo family was united in rejecting Emeka's attempts to disrupt their lives, and they had the legal system's support in protecting themselves from his harassment. The months following the revelation were difficult for the entire family as they worked to process the complex emotions and adjust to their new understanding of their family history. But they also proved to be a time of healing and growth that ultimately strengthened their bonds. Chioma and Kelechi entered marriage counseling to work through the years of secrets and deception that had shaped their relationship. It was painful to confront the choices they had made and the ways they had hurt each other. But it was also liberating to finally be completely honest about their experiences and feelings. "I'm sorry I let you suffer for so long," Kelechi told Chioma during one of their sessions. "I'm sorry I was too cowardly to tell you the truth about my infertility. If I had been honest from the beginning, you never would have had to make such desperate choices." "I'm sorry I deceived you," Chioma replied. "I'm sorry I built our family on lies, even if I thought I was doing it for love. You deserve to know the truth about the children's parentage." "But I did know," Kelechi reminded her. "And I chose to accept it because I wanted to be their father. That choice was mine to make, and I don't regret it." The children also worked through their own complex feelings about the revelation. Some sought individual counseling to help them process their emotions about their identity and family history. Others found comfort in talking with their siblings and parents about their experiences. What emerged from this difficult period was a family that was more honest, more open, and more intentionally committed to each other than they had ever been before. The secrets that had once divided them were gone, replaced by a conscious choice to love and support each other, regardless of biological connections. Ades, now Dr. Kelechi Nwankwo, became an advocate for families dealing with infertility and adoption issues. Her own experience had given her insight into the complex emotions and difficult choices that such families face. Chinedu followed his father into engineering, but he also became involved in organizations that support men dealing with infertility, helping to break down the stigma and shame that had kept his father silent for so many years. The other children each found their own ways to process and integrate their family's story into their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. 5 years after the truth came out, the Nwankwo family had found a new equilibrium based on honesty, choice, and intentional love. The crisis that had threatened to destroy them had ultimately made them stronger and more united. Kelechi had become an advocate for men's health issues, particularly infertility, speaking openly about his own experience and encouraging other men to seek help and support, rather than suffering in silence. His courage in revealing his condition had helped other families avoid the years of pain and deception that had marked his own marriage. Chioma had found peace with the choices she had made, understanding them as the desperate acts of a woman who loved her husband and wanted to give him the family he desired. She had also become involved in supporting other women dealing with infertility and family pressure. The children had all grown into successful, well-adjusted adults who understood that family is defined by love, commitment, and choice rather than genetics alone. They maintained close relationships with each other and with both parents, and they had all chosen to keep the Nwankwo name as a symbol of the family that had raised and loved them. Emeka had eventually moved away from Lagos, his attempts to insert himself into the family's life having failed completely. The restraining order remained in effect, and he had learned that his biological contribution to the children's existence gave him no rights or claims over their lives or affections. The extended family had also adjusted to the new reality. While some relatives had initially struggled with the revelation, most had come to understand that the bonds of love and care that had developed over 20 years were more important than biological connections. The children were still welcomed and celebrated as full members of the family. Today, the Nwankwo family's story serves as a powerful example of how love can transcend biology, how truth can be more healing than comfortable lies, and how families can survive and thrive even after the most devastating revelations. Kelechi and Chioma's marriage, tested by years of secrets and deception, emerged stronger and more honest than ever before. They learned that real intimacy requires complete honesty, even when that honesty is painful. Their children learned that identity is not determined by genetics but by the values, love, and guidance they receive from the people who raise them. They understood that Kelechi was their father in every meaningful sense, regardless of DNA. The family's experience also highlighted the destructive power of cultural stigma around infertility and the importance of open, honest communication about reproductive health. Kelechi's silence about his condition had caused years of unnecessary pain, while the cultural assumption that infertility was always the woman's fault had led to Chioma's desperate choices. Most importantly, their story demonstrated that families built on love and choice can be just as strong, if not stronger, than those built on biological connections alone. The conscious decision to love and commit to each other, made with full knowledge of the truth, created bonds that no blackmail attempt or external pressure could break. The Nwankwo family now includes grandchildren, the next generation of a family that understands the difference between biological connection and chosen love. Kelechi and Chioma are devoted grandparents who have passed on to their grandchildren the values of honesty, courage, and unconditional love that ultimately saved their family. When people ask them about their experience, they always emphasize the same message. Families are built by the daily choices to love, support, and commit to each other, not by genetics alone. The most important bonds are those we choose to honor and maintain, regardless of the circumstances that created them. Their story is a testament to the power of truth, the strength of love, and the resilience of families who choose to face their challenges together, rather than allowing secrets to divide them. In the end, the blood that truly mattered was not the blood that flowed in their veins, but the blood, sweat, and tears they had invested in building a life together. A life that proved stronger than any secret, any threat, or any attempt to tear them apart. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story of love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The Nwankwo family's journey reminds us that the bonds we choose to honor are often stronger than those we inherit, and that truth, no matter how painful, is always preferable to the most comfortable lie. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Family relationships can be complicated, but they can also be incredibly resilient when built on a foundation of love and honesty. Don't forget to subscribe to Narrated by Abi for more amazing true stories that explore the depths of human experience and the power of love to overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and let us know in the comments what you think about this family's journey. What would you have done in Kelechi's position? How do you think families should handle secrets that could be both protective and destructive? Share your thoughts below, and remember that every family has its own story of struggle, growth, and the search for truth and love. Until next time, this is Narrated by Abi, reminding you that the most powerful stories are often about ordinary people making extraordinary choices in the name of love.